My name is Lauren Mitchell. At 36, my mother slammed the door in my face and told me I was no longer her daughter. I had no job, no husband, and just $200 to my name. That night, I slept in my car under a frozen sky. Today, I'm speaking to you from my $18 million education center overlooking the California hills, a place built on everything she said I could never be. This isn't just a comeback story. It's a story for anyone who's ever been told they weren't enough. Because sometimes being cast out is the beginning. 6 months after my divorce was finalized, I returned to the only place I thought might still feel like home, my mother's house in small-town Ohio. I was 36, jobless, and carrying 2 suitcases filled more with shame than clothes. Once, I had been the youngest principal at a top-rated elementary school in the state, married to a seemingly perfect man, driving a hybrid SUV and planning a future filled with PTA meetings and retirement accounts. But the marriage ended with betrayal. The school cut my position during a budget crisis. And the savings vanished along with my ex-husband's promises. When I stepped off the Greyhound bus that foggy November morning, the Ohio cold bit through my coat like judgment. My mother, Karen Mitchell, greeted me with a nod instead of a hug. She didn't ask how I was holding up, just turned back toward her car and said, "The guest room's not been aired out, but it's better than the street." The house hadn't changed. Same beige carpets, same ticking clock in the kitchen that echoed like a metronome of disapproval. Lily, my younger sister, lived nearby with her paediatrician husband and 2 perfect kids. She stopped by often. Mum called her my rock. I was the driftwood that refused to stay grounded. On the 3rd night back, we had a family dinner. Karen had made roast chicken, and the table looked just like it did on Thanksgivings past. But the warmth was gone, replaced by the brittle tension of performance. Lily talked about her upcoming keynote speech at a medical conference, how her youngest was excelling in piano, how they'd just returned from skiing in Aspen. I sipped water and nodded politely. Mum turned to me. "And Lauren, what exactly do you plan to do now that you've burned every bridge you walked on?" I set my fork down. "I'm figuring it out. I'm looking at some online teaching programs, maybe tutoring while I get back on my feet." She sniffed. "Tutoring. That's a long fall from being a principal." Lily chuckled nervously. "Come on, Mom. Give her some space." Karen didn't flinch. She's had all the space in the world, and look where that's gotten her. Something cracked inside me. "You act like I chose this, like I woke up one day and thought, you know what sounds fun? Losing everything." She narrowed her eyes. "You chose to marry that man. You chose to prioritize ambition over stability. You always thought you were better than this family." "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking. "I worked hard. I built a life. And when it all fell apart, I came here because I had nowhere else." Karen stood up, her chair scraping violently against the tile. "Then maybe you should have stayed nowhere." "Mom," Lily gasped. "Don't," Karen pointed at the door. "Get out and don't come back. You're no daughter of mine." Time froze. Lily looked stunned. I didn't. I'd known deep down that love here came with conditions. The moment I failed to meet expectations, I became disposable. I stood, pushed in my chair calmly, walked upstairs and packed my bags in silence. No one followed. Outside, the wind howled, as if echoing the finality of her words. I walked to my car, a borrowed one from a neighbour who hadn't asked questions, and sat for a long time in the cold. I stared at the house that used to be mine, used to be warm. Now it was just another place that said I wasn't welcome. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally done asking to be let in. I found out my grandfather died the same way I found out about most things in my family, by accident. A grainy photo on Facebook, posted by a neighbour I barely remembered, showed a casket, lilies, and my parents standing beside it in stiff black. No call, no message, not even a cold, obligatory text. I stared at the screen for a full minute before the grief caught up and hit me like a truck. I booked a flight home to Maine that night. The plane touched down on a grey morning. The coastal mist clung to everything like a shroud. I hadn't been home in nearly 2 years. Boston kept me busy, or maybe I kept myself busy to avoid them. My job as an architect came with long hours and endless projects. Convenient excuses to stay away from the coldness that always radiated from my parents' house. But this was different. Grandpa James was gone, and I owed him a proper goodbye, even if it was too late. Driving into town felt like stepping back in time. The roads hadn't changed, nor had the little shops with their peeling signs and sleepy cats in the windows. But the moment I turned onto Maple Street, my breath caught. There it was, the old Victorian house. White with faded green shutters, it stood like a memory carved into wood and brick. That house raised me, not just sheltered, but raised. My grandparents filled it with warmth when my parents couldn't, or wouldn't. I pulled up to the curb, heart racing, expecting silence, but what I saw made me freeze. My grandmother was sitting on the porch steps, alone. Her coat was too thin for the cold, her grey hair wild in the wind. Next to her sat a small, battered suitcase. Her hands trembled around a styrofoam coffee cup, long gone cold. She looked up, squinted, and tried to smile, but her lips quivered. "Claire?" she said, her voice brittle. I rushed to her, dropped to my knees. "Grandma, what are you doing out here?" She looked down at her lap. "They told me this wasn't my home anymore." A chill, sharper than the air, shot through me. "What do you mean? Who told you that?" "Your mother and Charles," she said quietly, refusing to call him your father like she used to. "After your grandfather passed, they said the will left the house to them. They changed the locks the day after the funeral." I stood up, stunned. The front door behind her had a new digital lock. Gone was the brass keyhole I remembered as a child. The one Grandpa used to open every Sunday after church when we came back with groceries and wildflowers. "They didn't even let me take my things," she added. "Just said I should find somewhere else to go." I clenched my fists, vision swimming. "And no one tried to stop them?" She gave a broken shrug. "Who would? They have the papers. People trust papers." I helped her to her feet and led her to my car. She was light, too light, like she hadn't eaten properly in days. Every step she took rattled in my bones like guilt. As I buckled her in and drove toward the nearest inn, my mind spun. Memories tumbled over one another, the garden we planted together when I was 8. The time she stayed up with me all night during a thunderstorm, her apple pie that won every local fair for 15 years. This woman wasn't just my grandmother, she was the mother I never had. And now she was homeless, not because of war or poverty, but because of family. My family. I glanced over. She had fallen asleep, head resting against the window, her face soft despite the betrayal. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to end with comfort or quiet mourning. This was war. I grew up in a house where silence had a sound. It wasn't peaceful like the quiet of a forest or the hush of a library. It was the kind that pressed against your skin, heavy, unrelenting. The walls of the Callahan house were thick with military-grade insulation and expectation. You spoke only when spoken to, and even then, brevity was admired more than clarity. My father, General Franklin Callahan, embodied every inch of discipline the military could etch into a man. His medals didn't just hang in frames, they lingered in the way we sat straight at the dinner table and folded napkins into tight squares. My mother, Elizabeth, had lupus. She was fragile and tired more often than not. I learned early not to cry too loudly, not to run in the hallway, not to need too much. Her pain was a ghost that haunted the edges of every room, sometimes obvious, sometimes just a shadow. When she smiled, it was like watching a candle flicker in the wind, beautiful but always in danger of going out. I remember pressing my hand against hers just to feel some kind of anchor in a home where warmth was rationed like wartime supplies. We didn't say I love you, not once. We didn't say much of anything. I learned emotions the way other kids learned algebra, through observation and deduction. When my mother flinched ever so slightly, I knew the sun was too strong that day. When my father's jaw twitched, I knew I'd left my shoes near the front door again. Feelings weren't expressed, they were implied. And the consequences of missing those implications were steep. After dinner, while my father read military briefings in his study, I would sneak into my room, lock the door, and turn on a small radio I kept hidden behind books. BBC World Service became my first language tutor. I'd repeat phrases softly, mimicking accents, syllables, cadences. Je m'appelle Emma. Ich heiße Emma. In a house where I was expected to be invisible, words became my escape hatch. I didn't have friends over, ever. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't bear the idea of anyone seeing the Callahan home from the inside. It was immaculate, like a museum, but not a home. The furniture was pristine, the curtains always drawn at the exact angle to prevent fading, and the clocks all synchronized to military time. There was no laughter, no chaos, no life. By the time I was 10, I had memorized 30 basic phrases in 5 languages. I tucked language books between my mattresses, under bathroom cabinets, even inside the sleeves of winter coats. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Every new word I learned felt like a window opening just an inch wider. When my mother died, I was 14. She passed in the early hours of a Tuesday morning. I was the one who found her, her skin cool, her eyes half closed, like she'd been watching the ceiling for answers that never came. My father didn't cry. He didn't hold me. He stood beside her hospital bed with the same posture he used during military funerals. I sat alone on the vinyl bench in the hallway, watching orderlies push carts of medication down sterile corridors, wondering if anyone else felt how loud her absence was. We drove home in silence. At the house, I reached for his hand at the front door, more out of instinct than hope. He moved past me without pause. Later that night, he polished his boots in the kitchen while I folded my mother's scarves, each one still holding her scent like a last whispered goodbye. He didn't say her name once. The house felt even colder after that, though the thermostat never changed. Her photos stayed on the wall, but the light in them seemed dimmer, as if she'd already started fading from memory. My father resumed his routine, like nothing had shifted. But everything had, so I kept learning languages, not because I needed to pass a test, but because I needed to believe there was a world outside this soundproof prison. Somewhere, people talked. Somewhere, parents hugged their daughters. Somewhere, I miss you was a sentence spoken aloud, not something buried under medals and silence. The morning after my 14th birthday, I decided to test the limits of our silent treaty. I had spent the entire night whispering Italian phrases under my breath, the way someone might recite prayers before sleep. Vorrei una tazza di caffè, I murmured over and over, pretending I was ordering breakfast at a sun-drenched cafe in Florence instead of the cold, cathedral-quiet kitchen in our Ohio home. When I sat down at the table, my father was already there. Crisp uniform, perfect crease in his pants, black coffee steaming like clockwork. I placed a single scrambled egg on my plate, cleared my throat, and said gently, "Vorrei un po' di pane, per favore." He didn't look up, didn't blink, just reached for the butter and said, flat as steel, "That won't win a war." The words sliced the air clean in two. I stared down at my plate, face flushing with something between shame and fury. He didn't ask what I'd said, didn't wonder where I'd learned it. He just dismissed it like an empty cereal box. That was the thing about him. Everything not measurable by victory or efficiency was frivolous. Languages were decorative, emotions were wasteful, art, music, and tenderness were distractions from duty. He never said these things directly. He didn't have to. His silence did the talking. I finished breakfast in silence, swallowing both eggs and pride. Later that day, I was searching the upstairs linen closet for a spare blanket. Ohio winters bit through the walls like a slow leak, and I wanted something heavier than the thin military-issue coverlet on my bed. The top shelf held the usual, old towels, faded sheets, a heating pad that never worked. But tucked behind a stack of neatly folded flannel was a box I didn't recognise. It wasn't labelled, just dusty and plain. I pulled it down, heart quickening with that strange mix of guilt and curiosity that always came when uncovering something unsanctioned. Inside was a scattering of old books, yellowed with age. One in particular caught my eye, a slim navy blue notebook with Mon cahier de français scribbled on the front in delicate cursive. My breath caught French. I flipped it open slowly, carefully, like it might crumble. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, vocabulary, conjugations, tiny doodles of cafes and bicycles in the margins. And then the kicker, in the top right corner of the inside cover, a name, Elizabeth Callahan, my mother. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, soft, looping, precise, as if her voice had been frozen into ink. I sat down on the floor, the cold forgotten. Page after page unfolded like a secret life. There were notes about love poems, about Paris, about accents and pronunciation tips. She had written her favourite French phrase 3 times, "Je suis fatiguée, mais heureuse." I am tired but happy, I bit my lip. My mother had studied French, not for school, not for war, just for herself. A piece of her I never knew existed. A voice not given space under my father's command. I turned to the last page and found a line written in English, as if she knew one day someone like me might find it. "Even if I lose my voice, let my daughter learn to sing." Tears welled up, hot and immediate. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A realization rooted itself deep in my chest. Love wasn't always loud. It didn't always look like hugs or praise. Sometimes it was hidden in the pages of a notebook, in a language never spoken aloud. I understood then why I had clung to languages like oxygen. I hadn't just been learning them for escape. I'd been reaching for her, trying to resurrect something no one else in this house ever acknowledged. That night, I tucked the notebook beneath my pillow. Not for hiding, but for safekeeping. It wasn't rebellion, it was remembrance, and it was just the beginning. I still remember the envelope, thick, cream-coloured, embossed with the university seal, the kind of letter people frame. When I opened it under the flickering kitchen light, the words barely made sense at first. We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship. I had been accepted into a specialised linguistics program that partnered with the military, designed for high-level translation, cultural intelligence, and psychological operations. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, housing, even a living stipend. I was 18 and had just been handed a golden ticket out of silence. I waited until dinner to tell him. My father sat in his usual place at the table, still in uniform, as if starch and medals were necessary even for spaghetti. I placed the letter in front of him, heart pounding. He didn't pick it up right away, just finished chewing, sipped his water. Then, without unfolding it, he asked, "Does it involve firearms?" I blinked. "No, it's linguistics and cultural ops. It's meant to help with..." "Then it's support, not command," he said flatly. "Not combat." I nodded, unsure what that meant to him. "It's a full ride, one of only 20 students in the country selected." He finally opened the letter, scanned it without emotion, and folded it again. "You leave in August?" "Yes, sir." That was the first time I called him that out loud. Not Dad, just Sir. I didn't know why I said it. Maybe because that's how he'd always operated. Orders and reports, not affection. He didn't smile, didn't congratulate me. He simply passed the salt. Later that night, I sat in my room staring at the French notebook my mother had once used. I wondered if she would have cried if she was still alive, hugged me, asked what language I'd study first. Instead, I packed in silence. At school, I felt something unfamiliar: space. My dorm was small, but it echoed with laughter. My roommate was loud and warm and always burned microwave popcorn. She asked me to help her flirt in Russian. I taught her a phrase that meant, "Your eyes look like a Siberian sunrise." She used it on a guy in chemistry class. It worked. In class, I thrived. Syntax felt like music, semantics, a puzzle I was born to solve. I picked up Farsi, Arabic, and Mandarin with the speed of someone unlocking coded parts of her own heart. But even as I translated idioms and metaphors across borders, I couldn't decode the silence from home. So I wrote him a letter. It wasn't long, a page and a half. I told him what I was learning, that I wanted to use language to de-escalate conflicts before bullets were needed, that maybe words were just as strategic as weapons. I told him I was proud to serve, even if it was behind a desk or in a classroom. I ended with, "I don't expect you to understand, but I hope you'll be proud anyway." I sealed it, handwritten, no email, no shortcuts. Weeks passed, no reply. I told myself he was busy, that maybe letters just didn't mean the same to him. But deep down, I knew he had read it and chosen silence again. From then on, I referred to him as Sir in every call, every Christmas card, every memory, not out of respect, but out of necessity. A name too close to Dad felt like hope, and I couldn't afford that anymore. My classmates talked about homesickness, about missing their mum's cooking or their father's corny jokes. I listened, smiled when appropriate. But all I missed was the idea of a home that never existed. And when the nights got too quiet, I'd pull out that old notebook and whisper my mother's handwriting like a prayer. Je suis fatiguée, mais heureuse. I'm tired, but happy. I didn't know yet that some letters weren't meant to be answered. They were meant to free you. By her second year at the Defence Linguistics Institute, Emma Callahan wasn't just excelling, she was redefining what excellence looked like. While her classmates parsed sentences and practiced tonal inflections, Emma dissected dialects under stress conditions. She could mimic regional accents so precisely that professors often used her in mock drills to test other students' discernment. Her gift wasn't just in translation, it was in anticipation. She understood the rhythm of conflict, the hesitation before lies, the softness behind misdirection. In a simulated war room exercise, Emma was tasked with mediating a fictional hostage negotiation. Her mission: de-escalate without loss of life, using only language. She built rapport with the captor using Pashto and subtle tonal shifts, referencing obscure Afghan proverbs that hadn't been in the curriculum. Within 10 minutes, the scenario ended peacefully. The observing colonel called her method uncanny, while her classmates looked at her like she had just cracked a military enigma. That week, she received an unexpected invitation, a summer placement at the Defense Intelligence Agency. It wasn't the CIA, not quite the NSA. The DIA operated like a shadow behind the curtain, less known, more precise. Its work involved decoding intent, not just language. Emma accepted immediately. It felt like a calling, not a career step. At DIA headquarters, she was assigned to a decryption rotation. Code books, intercepted chatter, threat matrices. She was younger than everyone else in the room by a decade, but her focus was surgical. During one decoding session, analysts were stumped by a brief but heavily encrypted Farsi message captured from a satellite ping over the Caspian Sea. Emma stared at the pattern. Something about the syntax didn't sit right. "It's not a formal message," she murmured. "What?" said the lead analyst. "It's poetry," Emma said, tilting her head. "The rhythm, it mimics the Gazel form, but they've embedded numeric coordinates in the rhyme structure. It's camouflaged." The room fell silent. Then the lead analyst leaned forward and typed in the coordinates Emma suggested. The map zoomed in on a naval base, a restricted area under observation. 10 minutes later, someone made a call upstairs. No one told Emma what came of it. That night, as she left the building, a man in a grey coat stood near the security checkpoint. He wasn't military, no badge, no salute, just calm, nondescript precision. "Miss Callahan," he said. She turned, instinct on alert. "Yes? Walk with me." She hesitated, but he didn't look dangerous, just expectant. They walked past the parking lot toward a quiet path lined with low trees. "That code you cracked wasn't public knowledge," he said. "I didn't crack it," Emma replied carefully. "I read between the lines." He smiled faintly. "Exactly. Most people don't know there are lines at all." She waited. He continued. "There are units in this government that don't exist on paper, units that work where conventional intel fails. We operate through implication, not presence, through voices, not bullets. We call it the whisper." Emma blinked. "That's not a real thing." He stopped walking. "It wasn't, until you proved it could be." He reached into his coat and pulled out a plain envelope. No markings, just weight. "This isn't a formal offer," he said. There won't be records, no HR, no orientation packet. But if you're interested, truly interested in using what you are for something that matters, you'll know what to do with this." And she took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. "Why me?" she asked. "Because," he said, "you speak in frequencies no one else hears." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as if he'd never been there. Back in her dorm that night, Emma sat on her bed with the envelope untouched beside her. She stared at it for an hour before opening it. Inside was a blank piece of paper, But when she held it under her reading lamp, invisible ink shimmered across the page. It began, "We begin in silence." She didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but out of purpose, and so began the whisper. The whisper didn't begin with a bang, it began with static. Emma's first mission came 6 months after the envelope. She was flown to an undisclosed facility, somewhere in Northern Virginia. Fingerprinted, retinal scanned, and sworn into a compartmentalized role so deeply classified she couldn't even tell the attending nurse her real name. Her badge had no agency on it, just a single word: clearance. They handed her a headset before a name. Her briefing was brief: a hostage situation in the hills outside Sana'a, Yemen. A group of Western engineers had been captured by a rogue militia faction. Standard extraction protocols had failed, the terrain too dangerous, the faction too splintered for clear leadership. The only intel was a tapped phone line. They needed someone who could listen, interpret, and if necessary, guide. Her handler spoke quietly in the observation room. "You'll speak only if they initiate contact. You're the voice, nothing more." Emma nodded. The headset slid over her ears like armour. The signal crackled in. A man's voice, agitated, speaking in a dialect of Arabic most linguists avoided, Yemeni San'ani, fused with rural tribal idioms. She'd studied it privately for months, fascinated by its melodic cadence and embedded metaphor. Emma listened for 20 minutes before speaking a single phrase. "Your breath is heavy like the mountain wind. You are afraid of losing your way." There was silence on the other end. Then the voice replied, stunned, "Who are you?" Emma leaned forward, whispering, "Someone who hears what others do not. Let me help you find the path back." Over the next hour, she guided the captor through a linguistic dance, never demanding, never threatening. She recited poems from his region, used idioms only a native would know, referenced stories passed down orally. She let silence do half the talking. 3 of the 5 hostages were released that night. The remaining 2 were extracted 48 hours later by a SEAL team once negotiations collapsed. But even then, the soldiers had questions. One of the team leads, a man named Barrett, stormed into the comms tent after the operation. "Who was the translator?" he demanded. The supervisor pointed vaguely toward Emma, who sat sipping water, drained but calm. Barrett stared. "No way." The voice on comms. She sounded exactly like one of them. "We thought she was local. We called her the ghost voice. We didn't know if she was real or some kind of tech illusion." Emma stood, extended a hand. Real enough. From that day on, Barrett refused to use her real name, what little of it he knew. "She's not Emma," he told the others. "She's the Whisper." The name stuck. It moved through comms channels, through hushed briefings, through encrypted field reports. Operatives who'd never seen her began requesting the Whisper on their missions. She became mythologized, an invisible asset who could deconstruct tension with tone and dismantle violence with metaphor. In meetings, she sat behind frosted glass. In operations, her voice came through walls, speakers, silence. The only trace of her was resonance. She didn't correct the myth, she fed it. The more unknown she became, the more powerful her presence. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. When enemies don't know your face, they can't predict your next move. And when allies don't know your limits, they believe you have none. But in her quiet moments, Emma still reread her mother's notebook. The Whisper was a weapon, yes, but it had been born from a place much softer. A desire not to manipulate, but to understand. Her mother had once written, "Let your voice carry what your hands cannot touch." That night, Emma wrote her own note on the final page. I have become an echo no one can trace. And yet, somehow, I've never felt more like your daughter. And so, the whisper moved to her next mission, unseen, unheard, but never unfelt. It wasn't supposed to be different. Libya was another routine whisper, another voice in the dark, another militia fractured under internal fear. 3 Western aid workers had been taken near Saba, held in a compound shielded by local support and tribal tensions. Standard negotiation had failed. Local dialects varied wildly, and no one could get close without being spotted. Emma was deployed to a satellite unit stationed just outside of Murzouk. The comms tent was barely a structure, flapping canvas and overworked tech. Her chair wobbled and the headset had frayed edges, but her mind was sharp, tuned in to the signals others missed. She listened for 4 hours straight. Then, like a melody emerging through static, she picked up a key shift in tone. The captor's voice, deep, rhythmic, laced with grief. He wasn't angry, he was scared. She spoke one line, soft and deliberate. You fear ghosts, but carry your father's shadow. Let me show you how to put it down. A pause. Then the voice replied, Do you believe we remember our sins even when the world forgets them? Yes, she said, but memory isn't a prison. It can also be a map. The negotiation took 15 more minutes. 3 hostages walked free before nightfall. No gunfire, no casualties, just words, offered like olive branches from a voice the man would never see. It was a textbook success, until he said it. Right before disconnecting, as if testing a theory, the captor spoke directly into the mic. You're not really a ghost, are you? Emma Rowan? Emma froze. The headset went silent. The room followed. Barrett, who had monitored the call from the other side of the tent, stepped into view. What did he just say? Emma didn't answer. She stood, unplugged the headset, and walked out into the desert night. Her real name had never been entered into the Whisper protocols. It wasn't on any clearance file. It didn't appear in digital briefings or mission logs. Even among her handlers, she was known only as Echo 17 or the Whisper. There was only one place she had written her full name, Emma Rowan, in the last 6 years. A letter. She had written it 3 months earlier, handwritten, ink to paper, addressed to her estranged father. She never mailed it, she never copied it. It stayed folded in the back of her journal, tucked beneath a sketch of a cabin by a lake, a place from childhood that barely felt real anymore. She'd kept the journal locked in her quarters in DC under biometric seal. No one else had seen it. No one could have, unless someone had been watching her not as an asset, but as a subject. Emma stared up at the stars above the Libyan sands, her breath shallow. The world had just shifted. Her name wasn't just a slip, it was a message. Someone was listening to her. Back in the tent, Barrett watched her through the plastic window. That wasn't a lucky guess, he muttered to himself. Emma returned, calm mask intact, but her eyes were fire. Mission's done, she said. We need to go. Now. He didn't argue. Within the hour, the camp was packed, coordinates scrubbed. The Whisper vanished again into silence, but this time she carried something new. Doubt. And the haunting echo of her name spoken from a place no one should have known. The official report called it a security anomaly. The unofficial consequence was indefinite suspension. Her badge was deactivated, her clearances revoked. One moment she was the Whisper, indispensable, mythical. The next, she was just Emma Rowan again, a ghost without a purpose. But even ghosts leave footprints. They told her to rest, to let the agency reassess protocol breaches. But Emma knew how the system worked. You didn't get sidelined unless someone was scared of what you might find. So she started digging. Not in the loud way, Emma never did loud, but in the quiet, persistent crawl of code and pattern. She accessed archived signal logs from the Libya mission. Officially, her credentials were locked out. Unofficially, she'd helped write the fallback encryption when she was just starting. There were always cracks in the walls you built yourself. The first breakthrough came 3 nights into her search. Buried beneath the call logs was a sequence of hash values that didn't belong. Not noise, not interference. Something intentional, repeating patterns encoded between frequencies. She isolated them, ran a decryption sweep using standard whisper tools. Nothing. Then she tried something older, obsolete even. A schema used in the early 2000s for defense satellite handoffs. That's when it clicked. The encrypted fragments matched a proprietary pattern once used by Redmark defense systems. Emma sat back, pulse racing. Redmark had been one of the biggest private military contractors during the height of post-9/11 defense tech expansion. They developed remote signal masks, tactical noise overlays, and covert tracking tech for US and foreign governments. Her father, David Rowan, had served as a technical advisor to Redmark for nearly 5 years. They'd never talked about it much. He'd always claimed it was above her clearance level. Then again, most of her childhood had been classified by silence. Emma leaned forward, heart pounding. If Redmark code had been used in the Libya breach, someone had revived tech that was supposed to be decommissioned, and done so using a signature only a handful of people in the world would recognise, including her father. Twist tightening, she combed deeper through the decoded data fragments. One string stood out, 17 characters, repeating every 12 kilobytes. She ran it through legacy indexing software, just in case. Match found. It pointed to a dormant transmission node outside of Langley, Virginia, an abandoned relay station once used by Redmark for off-grid testing. The station had been decommissioned after the company's assets were absorbed by larger firms. It also happened to be 10 miles from her father's cabin. She remembered the place from when she was 12. They'd gone there for a weekend after one of his long deployments. The lake had been frozen over. She'd skated until her toes were numb. He'd watched from the porch with a thermos and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Emma zoomed in on the station's grid coordinates. The node had reactivated for 23 minutes on the same day as the Libya breach. No other spikes, no outgoing reports. Just a silent pulse in the dark, a breadcrumb, and maybe a ghost. She sat in the silence of her apartment, the only light from her laptop screen. On the desk beside her lay the journal. Inside, the letter she'd written to her father still rested, untouched. He never got it. And yet someone out there had read it. Emma closed the laptop. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, she packed lightly. No weapons, no backup. Just a tracker of her own, a thermal scope, and an old Redmark frequency scanner she wasn't supposed to own. She left the city without telling anyone. Because when ghosts leave breadcrumbs, someone's supposed to follow. Emma drove for hours without music, the silence inside the car, broken only by the occasional chirp of her custom scanner. Each mile took her deeper into memories she'd spent years avoiding. The trees grew thicker as she neared the relay station. Just skeletal trunks in late winter, like watchmen who'd seen too much. She parked half a mile out and approached on foot. The station itself was nothing more than a small concrete structure hidden behind a rusted chain-link fence. Power lines were long severed. No signage, just a metal door and an outdated keypad. Emma powered on her Redmark scanner. Within 10 seconds, a faint signal pinged. Recent. Active within the last 48 hours. She didn't attempt to enter. Not yet. She wasn't here to breach, she was here to confirm. As soon as the data synced, she uploaded everything to a secure partition on her offline drive. And then she went home. At midnight, in the glow of her laptop, Emma drafted the report. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was clinical, precise, just like she'd been trained. Subject undeclared relay activation, red mark signature, possible internal compromise attached. Evidence, frequency logs, code signature overlays, timestamps aligned with Libya breach. Analysis, red mark protocol decryption model, last registered under DoD internal tools, 2007. Reactivated via dormant node outside Langley. Location proximity to David Rowan, former Redmark technical advisor, non-incidental. Conclusion, unauthorized actor with legacy access engaging in signal interception, likely breach of Whisper protocol layer. Status, internal verification advised. Operative status suspended. Request, confidential audit, or no direct action yet. She sent it not to her former handlers, not to her agency supervisor. She sent it to OCU 3, Operations Coordination Unit 3, the department built to evaluate integrity breaches across interagency boundaries. It was the clean room of intelligence, designed to be incorruptible. Emma signed it nothing more. She expected silence. 2 hours later, her burner phone buzzed. One message. Source verified. Action in motion. OCU 3. She stared at the screen, breath caught. Someone believed her. Someone in the machine had seen the truth and didn't bury it. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in days, but belief wasn't enough. Emma closed the phone and turned to the mirror above her sink. Her reflection was pale, drawn, tired, but not broken. They called her the Whisper because she was invisible. But maybe that was the problem. She'd spent years dismantling conflicts in silence. She'd become a myth, a utility, a nameless force moved from one crisis to the next. But when the machine turned on her, there was no face to defend, just a reputation easily erased. That ended now, not out of vengeance, out of necessity. She opened a new file on her laptop and titled it OP Whisper, Declassified Profile, version 1. Not for public release, not yet, but a record, a future, insurance. She began writing, not the missions, not the classified specs, but the why. Her mother's voice, her first operation. The first time she saved someone with only a sentence. This was no longer just survival. This was self-definition. If they tried to erase the Whisper again, they would at least have to face the truth of who she'd been. And that, she thought, might be enough to keep her alive. The auditorium at Fort Belvoir pulsed with crisp uniforms and polished boots. Rows of military brass, intelligence analysts, and classified personnel lined the seats in silent anticipation. A low murmur hummed beneath the surface, a gathering storm of questions no one dared ask out loud. Emma sat in the third row, 2 seats in from the aisle. Her hair was pinned back, her posture neutral. Her name wasn't on the programme, it never was. 2 rows ahead, her father sat ramrod straight, David Rowan. Grey at the temples now, a chest full of medals, and a legacy more guarded than most databases. He hadn't seen her. Or if he had, he hadn't looked. At centre stage, General Carr adjusted the microphone. His voice, deep and practised, filled the hall with ceremonial weight. This evening, we recognise not only the achievements of tactical teams and operatives across 3 theatres of conflict, but the unseen force behind dozens of successful extractions, de-escalations, and neutralizations. A voice without a face, a presence known only by codename. Emma felt the air tighten. The general continued, "We require the Whisper present on this stage, A pause, a collective inhale, heads turned, some confused, some expectant. In the second row, a young lieutenant blinked twice, then leaned toward his superior. He didn't whisper softly enough. "That's her," he said. "She saved me in Iraq. Hill 8. Comms were jammed." Her voice came through, guided us out. Emma heard it. And so did her father. He turned, their eyes locked. It was not a cinematic reunion. There was no gasp, no tears, just recognition. And something behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or awe, or something harder to name. Emma stood. The room fell entirely silent. As she stepped into the aisle, a ripple passed through the crowd. Those who had heard the myths sat a little straighter. Those who knew her work nodded subtly. Those who'd doubted didn't move at all. She walked forward, unhurried. General Carr didn't speak. He simply stepped back and gestured toward the podium. Emma stood there, hands relaxed at her sides. "I am the whisper," she said, "but that's never meant silence." Behind her, a low shuffle, uniforms adjusting, boots recentering. Then a sound broke the room, shoes scuffing, chairs creaking. One by one, officers and enlisted alike began rising, not for protocol, not for orders. They stood because something sacred had been named in front of them, because invisible didn't mean forgotten, because myth had become human, and humans could bleed, but they could also command respect. David Rowan remained seated, his face unreadable, until the lieutenant turned to him. "You raised her?" He didn't answer. Emma looked out at the sea of upright forms. For years she had existed between frequencies, between commands, between the real and the theoretical. Now she stood in the centre, and the room had gone silent for her. There was no medal placed in her hands, no name announced in the citations. When General Carr shook Emma's hand, it wasn't recorded. No photographers, no press, just a quiet nod, a gesture that carried more weight than applause ever could. "You changed the outcome in 6 missions last year alone," he said under his breath, without pulling a trigger. Emma gave a faint smile. Silence carries farther than noise. He nodded again and stepped back. The ceremony moved on, shifting attention to battalion awards, citations of valour, recognitions of service. Emma returned to her seat without fanfare. No one clapped. But several pairs of eyes followed her, grateful, reverent, uncertain. Her father did not turn again. Afterward, the auditorium emptied slowly. Pockets of officers clustered to debrief, exchange cards, murmur theories. Emma moved quietly through the side exit, her badge deactivated, her presence undocumented. She didn't look back, but David Rowan remained seated long after the crowd dispersed. He stared at the stage, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Eventually, he pulled out his phone. A number still committed to memory, untouched for years. He called. The voice on the other end answered instantly. Gruff, clipped, familiar. "Rowan," he said. "It's David," he replied. A pause. "It's been a while." David hesitated, then asked the question he hadn't dared ask in the past hour. "The ghost whisper, was she the one involved in Sudan? The bombing attempt? Port Red Line?" Silence. Then a slow exhale. "If she was in the room, the mission survived." David leaned forward, his elbow on his knees. "She spoke 10 seconds before the detonation window. Flipped the entire route of the convoy. We never figured out how she knew." "You're asking if that was your daughter?" David closed his eyes. "Yes." The man on the line didn't answer directly. He didn't have to. Instead, he said, "She's the reason my son came home." David's grip on the phone tightened. "She never wanted the spotlight," the voice added, "but I've seen grown men freeze in fear until her voice came through. She doesn't command. She guides." David looked toward the empty stage. all those years. He had thought she was wasting time in linguistics, that learning obscure dialects and ancient languages was impractical, even indulgent. He'd told her more than once that French poetry wouldn't keep her safe in a real-world scenario. She had said nothing at the time because she didn't need to. She had become the quietest force on the battlefield. The phone call ended without ceremony. David sat alone for a while longer, surrounded by rows of vacant chairs. He didn't cry, but something broke. Not loudly, just the quiet crack of certainty shifting under the weight of truth. The daughter he once dismissed as the kid who liked words had whispered entire wars into surrender. The email arrived at 2:04 a.m. Emma had been awake, staring at the blinking cursor of her declassified profile. The room was dark except for the cold blue glow of the laptop. She wasn't expecting a message, let alone one from him. Subject, a question from drowandefantel.gov to erowansecuredmail.cc. Time, 02-104. Message, if I acknowledge fault privately, just to you, would you agree not to go public with any of this? I know I don't deserve silence, but I ask it anyway. Some names carry weight that crumbles if dropped too hard. There was no apology, not even a softened preamble, just calculation. A reputational firewall disguised as a father's plea. Emma stared at the screen for a long time. It wasn't that she had hoped for more. She hadn't expected contrition or confession. But the clinical phrasing still sliced deep. Not I'm sorry for doubting you, not you were right, not even I'm proud of you, just don't burn the name. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She thought about all the things she could write. Paragraphs of bottled hurt. Surgical lines that would pierce where medals never reached. Memories of being told to stop pretending those languages would matter. Of watching his back as he walked away from her recitals, her papers, her questions. She could have said it all. Instead, she typed one word, no. Then hit send, no punctuation, no farewell, no explanation, no. The word stood on its own, harder than steel, heavier than any classified op. She closed the laptop and leaned back, letting the silence wash over her. This wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was clarity. She had spent years training to read tones others missed, to hear meaning between words. But this time, she didn't need to decode anything. His message was crystal. He cared more about legacy than redemption. More about optics than the daughter who had once asked him how sound travelled farther at night. He never answered that question, now she knew, because silence amplifies in darkness. The next morning, Emma walked to the river near her apartment, a ritual from her childhood she'd resurrected when she needed quiet. The air was cool, the breeze steady. Her phone stayed in her pocket, unread. She watched the water bend around rocks and thought about all the things people asked her to protect. Information, alliances, lies. No one ever asked her to protect herself. Until now. Until she said no. And suddenly that one syllable felt like a liberation 10 years in the making. She whispered it again to no one. No. Then she smiled. Because sometimes, when silence breaks, it doesn't have to shout. It just has to be final. A week passed. Emma thought the door had closed for good. Her reply, just one word, had ended it. No fireworks, no retaliation, just quiet, like the final breath of a house settling after years of unrest. Then came the box. No return label, no postage, just a small, unmarked parcel left at her doorstep, heavy for its size. She stared at it for a long time before bringing it inside. She opened it slowly, carefully. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single brass pin. West Point. Its edges were worn smooth by time. The back still bore faint scratches from uniform fabric. Her father's name was engraved in the curve. She recognized it immediately. He used to wear it on days when he needed reminding who he was, on deployments, in briefings. The day she left for university, he placed it on the mantel, like a silent promise. She lifted it out of the box with trembling fingers. There was a folded note underneath. No salutation, no signature, just, "I testified, I signed, I named myself." Named. The only request I made was this: keep my daughter's name off the record. That's all I had left to give. Her knees buckled slightly. She sat on the floor. She read the note again, then again. He had testified, internally, quietly, without spectacle or press. He had stepped into a classified review hearing and admitted to authorising the Omega-12 file without proper review. Had confessed to bypassing vetting procedures. Had taken responsibility. He hadn't tried to shift blame. Not to a junior analyst, not to bureaucracy, not even to her. Instead, he had protected her, not by denying her existence, but by shielding her name. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't love spelled out in easy words, but it was something deeper. It was sacrifice. For the first time, he had used silence not to erase her, but to guard her. She clutched the pin tightly, the brass warm from her skin. This wasn't absolution. The years couldn't be erased. The absence, the cold dismissals, the endless need to prove her worth in his shadow. But this was something else. It was a line, a breaking point. She whispered, "Thank you," to the empty room, not expecting an answer. And maybe he'd never say the words aloud. Maybe he didn't know how. But now, for the first time in her life, she knew he had tried. In the only language he trusted. In the only way he knew how to show care. By stepping into the line of fire, so she wouldn't have to, Emma didn't return to fieldwork. Not after the hearings. Not after her name was quietly cleared and the files locked away for good. She could have requested reinstatement, could have reclaimed her analyst credentials and resumed her old rhythm of codes and missions. But instead, she did something none of them expected. She taught. The university offered her a contract, adjunct at first, then permanent. She accepted under one condition, that she be allowed to build a program of her own, a small one, specialised, focused on what intelligence often missed. She called it strategic linguistics and tactical communication. Others called it the listening program. She chose a basement room for the main lab, no windows, but soundproof walls and a single row of overhead lights. Students worked in near silence, learning to decode intent from tone, extract motive from hesitation, spot manipulation, not from content but cadence. She named the space the Whisper Room. It felt right, not flashy, not performative, just quietly dangerous. Word spread. Veterans from counter-intel units began auditing her sessions. So did therapists, negotiation experts, speechwriters. Students arrived unsure, left certain, not of power, but of precision. And, for the first time, Emma felt the kind of respect she never had to earn through someone else's shadow. Then, one afternoon, a student knocked on her office door holding an envelope. "Professor Rowan," the girl asked, "this came for you. There's no return address, but I think you should see it." Emma took it, curious. Inside was a photograph. She recognised the scene instantly. A 7-year-old Emma perched on a park bench, oversized book in her lap. Her father crouched beside her, pointing at a paragraph, both of them mid-laugh. She remembered that day. They had argued about whether echelon had a silent E. She had insisted it didn't. He had bet her a milkshake. She had won. The photo must have been taken by someone else, her mother perhaps, or a stranger in the park. It was candid, not posed, the kind of memory that clung to corners of the mind without permission. Tucked into the photo was a single folded slip of paper. Her father's handwriting. "You once said you wanted to change the world with your mind. Maybe you did. I hope you did." Emma sat back, the paper trembling in her hands. She didn't cry, she didn't laugh, she just let herself sit there, completely still. It wasn't closure, not really, but it was a page turned. A sentence whispered finally, in the tone that mattered most. Belief, not in legacy, not in duty, but in her. She rose, crossed the room, and pinned the photo inside the whisper room, above the whiteboard, just out of reach. No caption, no explanation. The students never asked, but some days, when she caught one staring at it too long, she'd just say, "That's what learning looks like, when someone listens." Emma never taught with stories. She never said, "I once knew someone who," or "back when I served," not because the memories were gone, but because the weight they carried wasn't hers to casually share. Her students didn't need mythology, they needed tools, so she gave them silence. Moments to pause, to reread tone, to practice listening for what wasn't said. In her classroom, hesitation was highlighted in red ink. Over-explaining was flagged as defensive. Precision wasn't a mark of arrogance, it was protection. A language, she once told them, has consequences. And sometimes survival depends not on what you say, but what you sense. It was during one of those sessions, late October, when the room dimmed under storm clouds and the projector flickered, that a student raised a hand. He was quiet, mid-30s, military haircut. Never said much, but always watched too closely. "Professor," he asked, "do you believe the whisper really existed?" The room stilled. Emma didn't flinch. She closed the folder in front of her slowly, then smiled. Not dismissively, not ironically, gently. "She's still speaking," Emma said. "Just not everyone knows how to hear her." Some students smiled, others looked puzzled. But in the back row, the man stood and bowed. Not a casual nod, not a stretch, a deep, deliberate bow. Emma blinked. She didn't recognize him. Not really. But something tugged at her memory. A mission name, a decrypted voice file, a call made from a collapsing embassy in Northern Africa. A voice she had guided through coded instructions, minute by minute, breath by breath. He had survived, barely. And now he was here. Not for glory, not for thanks, just to listen. Emma didn't acknowledge him with words. She just met his gaze and nodded. The class ended in silence. After they left, Emma sat alone in the whisper room, the projector still humming. She looked up at the photo of herself as a child, book in her lap, father by her side. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small notebook, and wrote just one line. "Sometimes the quietest voices save the most lives." She closed the notebook, locked the door, and left the light on.